love to be your biggest fan.
Welcome to the New Age Educators Podcast with your host, Tasha Rucker and
Alicia.
Thank you. And today our special guest is Marlicia Autry, and she is a former colleague of mine, a friend of mine, but also most importantly, a board member for the nonprofit I started, One Humanity. We are going to have a very interesting conversation today, all about getting up and into your feelings, how to process your emotions, how to control them, and what the benefit is coming out on the other side of having done so. So this is going to be a wonderful conversation. Please stay tuned and let's get into it. Marlicia, I want to start with the question, or how this entire conversation even came to be. I think we were in a conversation with my cousin Malia, and you just mentioned in passing something to the effect of having been resistant to what you thought I was trying to show you or share with you about controlling our emotions. And what you said was something like, I didn't want to hear it, but I eventually came to understand. And then we kept on with the conversation. So I didn't ask anything about it at the time, but it stuck in the back of my mind. And I was like, I want to come back to that. And so this conversation is me finally coming back to that, because I think that, that's certainly, at least in my experience with a lot of different people, I sense the resistance coming up, and it's not a resistance like in a hateful, spiteful sort of way. Like it was never anything that interfered with our relationship, but it's more like all of us, when you encounter something that is a truth, our initial reaction oftentimes is be like, I'm not ready for that. I don't want no part of that. I got too much going on over here. Like whatever that happens to be for each one of us. And I want to hear from you, like, what did it feel like to you? How did you process it? And yeah, we'll take it from there.
Okay, so I'll kind of backtrack a bit. Like Tasha and I've had this conversation since I've met her around it, and because I respect her, and because I don't like everybody, like real talk, I just don't, and that that's my journey, and that's my work to do. But I really got into this place of I really was naming who I am and who I was at the time. And a lot of it was around how I showed up, which I thought was authentic. And the distinction that I had not made very clearly for myself at that time was like the distinction between emotions and feelings, and kind of how that showed up for me, because I saw myself as a compassionate person. So I had tied this idea of feelings, emotions together, and how I know I show up around it to something that was a part of who I am. And anytime a part of who you are is questioned, you're like,
yeah,
don't tell me and that will, and again, it wasn't like a malicious thing, or it wasn't like, it was a resistance, not a resistance because of Tasha or what she was saying. It was a resistance to what I had not processed for myself about emotions and how I show up, because I was like, oh, I don't want to be this hard, even though I'm, low-key thug, but I don't want to be this hard person that doesn't have feelings and it's just like, to the world, because I felt that was a part of who I was, being compassionate and understanding, not being a fool, but being compassionate and understanding.
Yeah.
So the shift came when I really said, oh, I see how I might be tied to something that wasn't serving me in terms of how that showed up.
Yeah. You have anything on that, Alicia?
I would say, the part that sticks out to me was like when she's saying how it was from her perspective in a way, because like, she didn't want to be seen as someone. Well, she didn't. I don't know if she specifically said this. I think it was more along the lines of how she saw herself and relating to the world. It was like, okay, I'm a compassionate person, and then that involves feelings, but which is, I get that, because it's kind of like, okay, so if I'm behaving this way or I'm doing this one thing over here, then these other people should respond accordingly. And I feel like a lot of times we find out that they don't, and then kind of, affects our little inner space a little bit. But I feel like a lot of people do that.
Yeah.
So, but I feel like what you eventually realize is that, like, if you're gonna be something, or if it's your perspective or whatever, or however you're feeling, it really is just, and not that you can't find other people that share the same perspective, or how should I say it, like, way of being, but it's really just personal to you.
Right.
A lot of times. So, and I know, because like I've been there too, where I just be like, like, why? Like, I'm feeling like I'm acting, or I'm doing the things that I need to do, behaving the way I should behave, and when I'm not getting that or receiving that in return, it just feels like I'm distant. This should distance myself, or it makes me want to question myself. Like, maybe I'm not doing the right thing, or could I be doing something different? But really, it's all one aspect, but it's separate at the same time, because it's really about the individual self.
Yeah, definitely. And what I came to, like, speaking to the idea of my intuition, it's like I always had this inner knowing of what it meant, but I had to get the distinction of being compassionate did not have to be one singular way, and being compassionate doesn't mean I have to be kind, or not like a pushover. Because I learned that compassion can be telling truth radically. Compassion can be saying no. Compassion can be not responding in a way that I may be feeling inside because of what I'm thinking, but it was those distinctions that I made, and then that's when I was able to wrap my head around, oh, I'm not being asked to change, but I'm being asked to connect to who I am, and being asked by myself to connect to who I am. And the conversation that Tasha and I had was, a good way, along with other things that were going on in my life, at the time, that was helpful to who I am and who I know myself to be. But that voice that you talked about, which was talking to me, but I hadn't heard it in the same way, because the other things
take priority.
Yeah.
And I think I want to highlight what you said, because I think you hit the nail on the head for many people. The pushback, and I didn't always understand it when I didn't always understand it, and I wasn't always as gifted as I believe I have grown to be in speaking to it in a way that didn't automatically raise people's, like, defense mechanisms. But many people believe that not, quote unquote, feeling means that the whole world will turn gray. They think that it means that you will stop feeling, that you are supposed to. And I think, Marlicia, what you said, that you felt like you were being asked initially to give up the compassion, like the actual reaching out to others. And if I could say, that's what I kind of see. I try to use the word sensitivity instead of feeling, because I think what we're talking about, if we're talking about eventually developing an intuitive sensitivity, we're talking about that taking place of what could be an emotional sensitivity, which is just a higher type of sensitivity when it's coming from, you know, a higher spiritual plane or our intuition. So it's not about not feeling, but feeling differently or reaching out differently, being sensitive in a different way. And I think that's what people struggle with, because, and it makes sense because we are a very emotional people. And
Right.
so all the problems though that you see in the world are from people having a whole bunch of emotions, not processing through those emotions and not knowing that there is a higher sensitivity possible that would
Right.
help us not only solve the problems we have, but solve your personal problems and bring you peace. Bring you peace, bring peace to the world. And
Right.
so I thought that that was really important for you to highlight in your statement, especially for sensitive people. When you encounter insensitivity in other people or sensitivity that doesn't match your way of being, it can make you feel some type of way. And she said she might pull away, like that's her defense mechanism or whatever. And other people, I think that's probably natural for all of us. We may not
Right.
physically pull away, but you definitely put up walls or you block people out, or, at the, more extreme end, you disparage people because you feel like, you feel whatever you feel about them, and
Right.
they're not showing up in the world in the way you are. And if you can't make sense of their way of being, then you are likely to say their way of being is wrong. Right. And so I think becoming differently sensitive based on an intuition or intuitive insight, I think helps us understand a wider range of people, for one. And, I know that that's been true in my own experience. I was probably more accepting because I think I always felt like if I have to get a job done, I can work with anybody to get the job done. Whether I like you or don't like you doesn't really take precedent for me because I'm like, I'm not going to let anybody stand between me and the job I have to do. And so that's how I really rationalize it. So it doesn't mean that I'm like wanting to hold hands with everybody, sit with everybody, be at everybody's house, commune, with everyone. What it does mean is in my purposeful work, there's no one who I will not be sensitive to reach out, to try to understand them, to have compassion for them, and to figure out how can we work together to build something better. Like that's my thing. And I think that's the push for everyone. Like, how do we help people not be resistant or to overcome their own resistance and identify it and overcome it?
Yeah, and I think for, to use my own personal piece, and I don't know if this will work for everyone, I think that the resistance for me came from, with the world, it's like there was always in my life and in the experience that I had at the time, it was people telling me who I am or who I need to be,
Mm-hmm.
either explicitly or not so explicitly. And it was also this place of, at that time, me really standing in my own voice and in my own truth and who I was and really trying to make meaning of that. So the resistance may come from a place of, I'm not ready to hear that from you. I need to hear that from me. But I
Yeah.
do need to hear it from you
Mm-hmm.
because that sparks something in me.
Right.
But it might be 10, 15 years later that I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, oh yeah, I kind of, I get
I
this
get it.
this place, and that's okay
Yeah.
because that wasn't my place to get it at that time because
Mm-hmm.
there was healing to be done, there
Mm-hmm.
was learning to be done, there was growth to be done, and
But I
something that,
would say, Marlicia, you did actually get it because that is,
yeah,
like you said, what sparks the healing, the rest of
right.
the journey. It's not, I would say maybe it wasn't yours to manifest at that
Right,
time.
or to articulate more
Yeah.
at the time because
Yeah.
how it showed up was, and I can't say it on here because this is probably a Christian show, but it showed up with, just kind of, real talk, push back on it, not disrespecting of the person, Tasha, who was saying it to me, but just
Mhm.
like, that might be for you, but for this, and I'm putting
Right.
my finger from my head to my toe, for
Mhm.
this, that's not me because I think it's this idea of owning who you are and the sensitivity that you spoke of, and I've always known that, but I think the other thing for the resistance is when people hear certain terms, emotions, feelings, sensitivity, it's been demonized
Yeah.
in certain ways.
Yeah.
And you have to make distinctions for yourself that
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be that
Yeah. I
for
think
you.
that's really important, because I would say the difference between the old me and even before meeting you, I think I had let go of a lot of that was I demonize feelings and emotions because it's not the way that I experience the world. And I think that's what had to be my journey, to be put in situations with people who were sensitive in a very different way from myself. And I even talk about that in the book Unleashing the Good, a small little plug. But the lessons that I was learning in relationship with my uncle for many years, who is a very sensitive person, he doesn't, because he is a man, I think he doesn't show up in the way that people often internalize or speak about sensitivity, but definitely a person who loves and
Mhm.
generously loves and reaches out to others. And you can just see that in everything. And for me, I'm like, we equally love humanity. We equally love people and want to help, but it looks very different coming from him as opposed to me. And I am not a person who really understood like the clinging to that sensitivity, especially when I could see that, number one, for the individual, usually it was keeping them in a state of turmoil. It was bringing them back to experiences. And I'm going to pass the mic to Alicia so she can talk about her recent one. But it kept bringing them back to this place where their feelings about a situation or their sensitivity to a situation or to other people, what other people thought about them, how other people treated them, was keeping them stuck. That's what I started to feel. And I wanted desperately to help people release that. And again, I had to go through a very long learning process to be in a position where I think I am now able to do so, because I have a lot more understanding and compassion. So, Alicia, if you want to
Mhm.
share from just your recent happenings.
Okay, my little expenditure. I would say this, which is I feel like this is probably why me and Tasha have like a lot of understanding um, with each other, is because like I usually don't typically approach the world emotionally either,
Right.
but I have this tendency to like think about okay, well, let me think ahead, or even like if a situation occurs and I might not necessarily be the fault in the situation, I'll be like, you know what? This person, I'll like trying to think about the state of being that the person probably was in, and make the excuse for them. And I might let it slide. Okay.
Mhm.
So but I will say this, the challenges that came up for me the past few years was about me really coming to terms, like facing my emotions. I feel like going deeper, like seeing what that was for me in order to take myself to the next level. Because sometimes, because I found out it wasn't about me necessarily getting rid of those things, those sensitivities,
Mhm.
but like you said before, Tasha, like learning how to respond or act differently, and especially according to what my intuition is leading me to do. Because especially like interacting with other people, you never know.
Mhm.
Marty, like saying no to somebody
Right.
could be them having to go through this learning process on their own.
Mhm.
That a lot of times we find ourselves, since we want to be accommodating to people's feelings, we take away from them like
Mhm.
certain experiences. So, but um, just recently, this just happened like a couple because I called Tasha. I'm thinking like on Friday,
Yep.
no,
Friday.
Thursday.
Was it
So
Thursday or Friday? Yeah.
I'm thinking Thursday because
Okay. Yeah.
so I'm at work, right? Teaching, and I have, there's paraprofessionals, like my coworkers and everything. This day was a little bit off, and I was not in my typical classroom. I was in another teacher's classroom because our kids was having a prom and we had to get everything, situated for them. Well, my principal pops in the room because like it was like just right after I get the kids settled down and everything, and I start just like I'm like, okay, guys, let's settle down. We're gonna talk about, let's go over some stuff we were talking about this week. Principal pops in the room to observe me, to do an observation. And I'm already feeling like a little bit off because I'm like, I'm not in my classroom. I don't have any papers, anything that, like usually their materials that they use. And I told him, I was like, when he came in and he's like, oh yeah, I'm here to observe you. And I was like, but I explained to him what we were just doing in the transition process of that. And I'm like, I don't really have anything. And he was like, no, let's just see what you got. So I'm already feeling a certain type of way, but I'm like, no, I got this because I'm gonna get up and I do what I usually do when he's not in here. So set up the little display for the, like, we were like on the screen looking at a video. In pops one of the paraprofessionals into the room, and she comes up to the front where I am and proceeds to take over like what I'm saying. I'm asking the kid the students a question, and she pops in and she asks them another question. So I'm like, and the principal's watching. Okay, so I'm like, well, okay, but first, I would like for them to answer the question, that I just asked, and I re-asked the question. So I'm assuming that at that point she felt like, okay, well, this is a competition and I'm just going to go to the next level. Several times she interrupted me, and I kept redirecting right back over to what I'm talking about. And then I asked a question when we were talking about dinosaurs, right? So they saw like this image of like the mammoth, and he had like the tusk or whatever. And mind you, these are like EC students too. Okay. Trying to set the scene for you guys. So I asked a question of, well, what are the tusks? I asked them to tell me what they thought that they were, and one of the students answers and says they look like horns. She jumps in, and this was my last straw, by the way, but she jumps in and she's like, nope, you're wrong. Those are not tusks. I mean, those are not horns. They're tusks. And I was like, let me gather myself a little bit because I still have to remain professional, but I have to let her know at the same time she's overstepping her boundaries. Okay. So I was like, well, wait a minute. I was like, it's not about her being right or wrong. I'm asking these questions because I want them to think deeper about what it is. I want to hear what their answers are because these interactions are learning experiences for them. So I then said to the student, you know what? You're not wrong. You did a good job. Those are like horns. Those look like horns. I could see why you would say that. And I just told her the correct termination is tusk. And then I related on to the elephants or whatever in today's world. So after this situation happened, because that was one of the last interactions I had with her. And after that happened, she left out of the room. I could tell that she felt a certain type of way because sometimes, a lot of times it's not about the person telling you how they feel. You can tell that their behavior changes. Mm-hmm. So she's walking around and she's like, in her attitude, her usual things that she does in her interactions with me was not happening. It was a lot going. She was not really being accommodating to like us helping out the students, get ready for their prom and stuff after that. And I just was like, I had it. I just was like, you know what? I'm going home. It was close at the end of the day, but I was like, I'm going home because
Can I interject? Can I interject here? Okay. So I get a phone call. I'm in the car and I pick up the phone and she says, basically, I walked off the job. Like I left. And so I had a lot of questions. And I was like, my first question was like,
as would I.
Yeah. Was she in the middle of teaching a class? Did she just, like, and I'm not going back.
Right.
I was like, okay. I was like, start at the beginning. And so go ahead.
Yes. And then that's when I was like, and I'm like, let me just go ahead and go. And then I told some of my coworkers, I was like, I'm just gonna go home for the day. Mm-hmm. And then they were like, why? Even though they knew because they were all in the same room together. And mind you, well, I'll get around to that. But so I'm going home. So she sees me getting my bag and everything, and she comes into the room where I am. And she's like, she asked me some random question. And I was like, no, she asked me where some jacket, did I know where somebody's jacket was or something? And I was like, no, I don't know where anything is. And and I walked out the door. And I get in the car and I'm like, on my way, putting the car in drive. I'm like, no, you know what? Let me call Tasha. Because I feel like it boiled down to this. Not necessarily that I felt wrong, but the fact that I wanted to hear the truth about, like, you know, I wanted advice and I wanted to know, like, straight and direct what her thoughts about it was. Because I was like, you know, for me, and I even explained to Tasha, I was like, for me, it's not just this one isolated thing. It's just been a buildup of things over time. And I just felt like I'm tired of being put in these crazy positions and blase, blase. So I'm talking to Tasha, and yes, she's like, well, wait a minute, like, what was going on? Like, tell me what happened. Like, take me to the process of what happened. And I explained to her everything that happened. And, you know, you basically told me that, you know, I need to just take a step back and really look at what this was all about. Because really, even though it seemed like it was about the lady and about these other situations, it was really about me. And evidently, I was triggered by something.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And even if she was doing what she was doing, which is her typical behavior, for me to get triggered by it, it meant that I noticed it. I reacted to it in a way that I really wasn't so proud of, you know. And what did that mean for me?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And go ahead, Marley.
Now, I was just going to say that's a very, what you just said, the last part about like recognizing that it's a very visual and like visceral way of understanding what's going on. And Alicia, when I hear that, it's like it's a human having a human experience. And like you told your student, there's no wrong to it. How you acted and how you reacted was the way you did for that moment. I think the learning was you were reflective and introspective, and then you reached out, and kind of how Tasha was saying, like finding those people that you can, and you said this too, that will give you the truth or tell you that, because you know it's coming from a place of, I respect you, I care about you, I want the best for you. And I know that for me, that has always been, you know, very limited people I can just reach out and say that to, because first I have to explain them, not just the situation, but just me, because they haven't, even though they've been in connection with, well, I would say connection, they've been in proximity with me, they've been in my life, they haven't been connected to who I am and how I show up. And that's how the thing. So the other thing I'll say is like what comes up for me about like the emotions part of it is I had to learn, and Tasha used to say this all the time, and I used to always be like you gotta detach from that. And I'm like, I detach it from nothing. That makes me human. I mean, I didn't say this out loud, but I said it with my spirit. And sometimes I did say it out loud. But what I learned was detach wasn't not feeling, or the gray that I think I heard Tasha say. Detaching is the person may or may not change, even if I've had a conversation with them. I have to be different. I have to show up differently in how I interact. That doesn't mean I'm like, la-di-da, it doesn't matter. It just means that I can't get myself in a place outside. And I'm not saying I don't ever do that, because I do, but I recognize what it means now to be like, oh, that's just such and such being such and such. I have to ask myself, am I vetted? Am I vested in having a real conversation with this person right now in this moment, or at all, or however that shows up? And I appreciate your story. I mean, you know, you're not story. It's not a story. It's a experience. I appreciate your experience, because it's so much learning in that for me, and application in that for me.
Oh yeah, and mind you, I told Tasha, I was like, when I left, I was like, y'all, and I probably won't be back tomorrow neither.
And that was the day of the prom. for the
Yeah,
student.
it was like, it ended up being yesterday, right?
Okay.
But the kids were excited about it. Like they're like even talking with their parents. It was something they've been talking about for weeks. And I was like, after I talked to Tasha, I was like, yeah, I thought about it. No, I even told you before I got off the phone with you. I was
Yeah.
like, you know what, Tasha, you're right. Because after I realized what that deeper trigger was for me, because in Tasha, you were even saying it was like, yeah, when we think that we have worked on something, we've cleared it or whatever, it's a test that comes.
That
Yep.
pops out like, ha ha. Yeah,
Yep.
It's
yeah.
like, hey,
Right.
and and I told her, I said, you're right. And I was like, it's definitely really not about her, especially not that isolated situation.
Right.
And for me, I kind of feel like, and I don't mind sharing this because I've even talked to Tasha about this before. My biggest thing for a long time has been rejection, and dealing with that and dealing with those feelings. And like, because everything that I'm into or my life leads me towards, the majority of the people find, okay, that's kind of awkward. You shouldn't be doing that. You shouldn't be operating in that. And it's like I've battled having to be myself and be authentic in that, or having to shape and form myself into what others wanted me to be.
Right.
So it was like that trigger came up because even though she wasn't trying to reject me or anything like that, I just felt like, here we go again. Like you're trying to, it felt like she was trying to say I didn't know my job properly or something, and I was like, was I trying to prove something? Because really, I don't have to prove anything to her. It's just like one of my coworkers said that happens to be an Aquarius. I was telling you about Tasha. He was like, but this is the thing. It wasn't her. You were doing your job already. And he was like, you were the person in that position getting paid for it. So I don't even understand what was there to prove. And I was like, right. So long story short, Thursday, by the time I got on the phone with Tasha, I was like, I'm going into work tomorrow. Got up Friday morning, went into work. My kid, we had fun with the students. She didn't show up though.
Wait a minute.
Look at
Okay,
God.
I'm glad you said that, because one part you skipped before we got off the phone, you had said you were gonna go back, but from now on you were gonna keep your distance.
Okay.
And I said, I spoke to that, and I said, no, you can't do that. You have to go in and be you. You have to show up. I said, because the lesson for us is, and I think you just laid it out perfectly, talking about the rejection. I've always accepted the fact that I'm an innovator. I'm a catalyst. And what comes with that is this idea that I can't be worried about what other people think about me. I got to show up in places and do what I'm there to do based on what spirit is telling me to do. Because if I allow other people and their opinions about me or the work I'm doing or how I'm showing up and how I'm doing it, if I allow that to derail me, I can't bring them what I know I'm here to bring them. And I can talk about many experiences where that just was right front and center. But that was the reason that I was saying the rejection is part of what the lesson is, overcoming that and still showing up and doing what Alicia is there to do in whatever way, not just your job, but people need to see you be you. The students need to have what it is you bring to the table. And so if you go back and you're like, because once you make that decision that I'm just going to keep my distance, I'm going to be a little less me, then you're not giving what you're supposed to be giving. But also in that, you are going to be thinking about, how do I hold myself back a little bit, and then that becomes the thing that you're most focused on, like, because you're out there having fun and dance with the kids, whatever. And it's like, oh no, I can't do that because I've said I'm gonna keep my distance. I'm not going to.
I realized that even yesterday while we were there, because you're right. I did say that. I said, you know what? I'm gonna go back to on Friday, and I said, but I'm just gonna be a little bit different. I'm going to like stay to myself. Just focus on this and focus on that. And Tasha was telling me that's not the best idea to do, or whatever. And I thought about it, and I was like, you know what? That's true. Because that's not hurting her or anybody. That's just holding me back. And I went in. And I said, and I was like, I'm gonna go in fresh. I'm not even going. I said, and I'm not even having a conversation about it. If she brings it up and she wants to talk, fine. And I told Tasha, I feel like I really didn't even have to prolong it because I handled it in a moment. When she
Yeah.
overstepped her boundaries, I redirected it. So I was like, so what was the extra stuff that was all about me? And I went to work Friday. She didn't show up.
Mm. Look at
And
God. Look at God.
Look at God.
everybody was saying that. They were like, okay, I'm glad. But and I had conversations with my coworkers, or they came to me that was in the room that was present, and they were like, you know what? Nothing against her, but she clearly, that was not the right thing to do, you know? And I was like, okay. And, you know, and I was like, we're not going to, I said, it's water under the bridge. I'm not going to hold on to it. Yesterday, showed up, you know, looking fancy. The kids had a ball. I was not distant. I got out there on the floor dancing with them. The parents were there. They love it because they love to see us interacting with the kids and making them feel included.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, because like the county that I work in, we do the prom, but the county that I live in, they don't. And one of the parents that's also assistant principal works in the county that I live in, and she was like, you know, because y'all do this prom, we don't do it in Cumberland County. So that's something that I started speaking to other administrators about, and it's something that we're going to start doing. And I was like, that's great, you know? And she was like, because it's really nice. Like they dress up and everything and have food. So, but I was happy with the results. I came and I felt like I mastered something. Now the lady did show up at the prom. And, you know, one of my coworkers that I always talk to, he was like, you know, if you see her, would you speak to her? And and I was like, well, I said, I'm not having any crazy conversations because it's about the kids tonight. And he was like, no, because she was saying that she felt like now it's everybody. All of us are mad at her because nobody's talking to her. And I said, really, that's not really true. That's her own feelings because nobody's mad at her. And I was like, and everybody else, they said they don't even really care about it. They just they don't want us to be awkward at work.
Yeah.
But we didn't really speak because when the time that we made eye contact, she looked away quick. So I was just like, okay. And I left it at that because I was like, now that's her own feelings. She has to deal with. Maybe she feels like she shouldn't have done what she did.
Guilt. Yeah, it could be guilt.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah. There are a couple of things I that came up when you were sharing that, when you said like I want to push back, you know, and then you got the conversation with Tasha about it. I think the distinction I would like to make for anyone listening and for myself is that in those moments when because I felt that before where like, oh, I'm just going to push back. I have to identify for myself, what is that about? You know, and most often for me, it's about safety and boundaries.
Yeah.
Like, what do I need for myself to be safe and to be okay? Yeah. And I think the extreme to that would be not like pushing back and not showing up as yourself. For me, I think a balance would be to be cautiously, you know, looking at like I said earlier, like I want to be compassionate, but I don't want to be no fool. I don't want to be, you know, just, you know, out there. But it's like really asking myself or asking yourself when you have those, because it's your, I think it's my intuition telling me I need something. But what I choose to get may or may not be beneficial.
Right.
So it may cause me to not dance with the kids or not be connected or look at her and be like, you know, like that is not the way to be. I know that I could do that, which I have, you know, don't judge me.
Show the turtle with the knife.
We are.
She calls herself turtle.
I know, right? But it's that thing, and I think that's the, you know, those are the distinctions I made when I was shifting in my head around this conversation. Is that I can't go from 0 to 100 and not have some
it's a process
up there, and then when I need to take something off or whatever, I do that. But I also need to have grace with myself and say, hey, you know what, and honor my feelings. I feel some kind of way about you stepping across that, and that's okay. Now, if I stay in that feeling, that's, you know, that's a different conversation. But it's honored. That's how I feel, because something right here is not, you know, driving with me, and I need to interrupt me going to 1,000. But I also need to make sure I put some space in there to take care of me and to learn from that and to show other people look,
This is
that's not okay. Like you did, like
Right.
you directed and you did all of that. And yeah.
And
Well,
I
you
would
know
say
what?
I gave her credit because she said one of her coworkers came up to her before she left school that day and said she handled it masterfully.
Mhm.
That's
And
what
I
I
gave
just
her credit that from the outside, you did what you were supposed to do. And I said, and that demonstrated a certain level of mastery. And I
Mhm.
said, so now what we're dealing with is not what the outside sees, but how you feel about how your emotions are still controlling you rather than you controlling them. And that can be the process too,
Right.
because that's ultimately, it's not about this, because it's like, oh, you did what you were supposed to do. From the outside, they got what they needed to get.
Right.
You still feel some type of way because to me, that's your intuition guiding you to a higher level. That's it
Mhm.
saying, you know what, there's a little bit more work for you to do, and you can still free yourself a little bit more and
Mhm.
keep moving along that pathway. But thank you for sharing that. It is a process. And yeah, if you try to go from 0 to 100, you go crash like many
Right.
people do. Or you're going to get in and crash, like you're going to be in a situation that drives you back even further
Right.
from where you have
You'll
progress.
miss the lessons, and then the next
Yeah.
time it'll be 0 to 200
Yeah.
instead of, it'll just
Yeah.
keep widening.
Yeah.
But something that was said earlier about, like, because my thing, and maybe we'll both have something to say about this, is I pick up on energy very easily, and there are some people I just don't like. I,
Mhm.
I'm not there yet to engage with them for whatever reason. It's not that I see them and I'm like, having any negativity. It's just like I know that I'm not in a space to deal with them in the most compassionate way.
Right.
So I have found that I have to look at that where I can't push myself so far into that in that area of just like I'm out of that. It's not comfortable for me. So I'm in the space of still asking myself, like, what is it? Is it this
Mhm.
person? Is it me? Is it a
Mhm.
memory? Like I keep
Mhm.
asking all those questions, but real talk, there are some people, not a lot, but there are some people I just like I don't f with because
Yeah.
I just it's better for them that I don't
Yeah.
because Jesus working with me, but he's still
Right.
working with me real hard because I is
And I can share the story that I ended up sharing with Alicia on the phone that day. Um, I had a student who, I didn't have a problem with any of the students. There were no students where I felt like I, just don't like that kid. I don't want to be bothered or whatever. But this student was a challenging student, and he was never in a class of mine, but would always try to come up in my room. And so there was another student who he was friends with who ended up being my TA. And so sometimes during my planning period, my TA would be in there, helping out with stuff. So one day the kid came in with him. I stepped I stepped away to go to the restroom. When I come back, somebody has taken like all the extra computer wires and cords and the screens and just thrown them out on the floor, just at various places. And so I knew my TA would not have done anything like that. And they're sitting there together and he's looking sheepish. But with peer pressure, you also aren't trying to stop the behavior or whatever. And so I'm like, I just kind of wave my hand like this. And I'm just like, what happened here? And so, of course, nobody's talking. And the other kid, who I call Dimples, because he had the deepest, cutest dimples, uh, I'm like, I know he did it. And I just tapped him on the shoulder and I was like, you got to go. You just got to go. And so he's like, what for? Blah, 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 blah. And so he goes out. So fast forward over the next couple weeks, he keeps trying to enter my classroom. Like when kids are changing classes, he would come to the doorway. So I would basically become a wall, like standing in the doorway. I was like, hey, Dimples, you can't come up in here. And so certain things, though, started escalating. And I'm just like telling myself, well, I know I'm in the right. I don't have to be bothered with this kid. He's not my student. I don't have to let him in my classroom. I don't have to really give him any energy. He's not my student. And so what Spirit was telling me and that I was resistant to is that he needed me for something. And so, like I said, I don't know all the things that transpired, but somehow the two of us ended up in the principal's office together. And he was upset. This is what I finally came to understand. He was upset. He wanted something from me that he didn't know how to ask for. So that's the acting out. He's the kid pulling the little girl's ponytail because he likes her, that type of thing. And he had come from a family with he was a Mexican kid, a lot of machismo in the family. And various people, other teachers, other staff had said, oh, yeah, he hates women. Like he does not like women. And so he had never responded to women. And in fact, was very disrespectful to them or didn't have anything to do with them. And so I don't show up in the way that he believes women should show up. And so I think that caused a problem. And so he was working through all of these issues. And like you just said, Marlise, I know who's mine to deal with and who's not for whatever reason. And so my initial reaction to him wasn't like pushing him away other than at the doorway of my classroom, but it was more just like there's nothing that we need to be doing at this particular time. But I observed him long enough to really come to the realization that what he needed was for somebody to reach out to him and give him something that he was really begging for, but didn't know how to ask for. And so he kept acting out. And so what ended up happening is I said, because he was supposed to be he wanted to go to college. So he was trying to prepare for the SATs and he wanted some additional writing assignments. He didn't have the skills or the discipline to do well in that. But I finally said in the principal's office, I said, okay, I said, let's choose a book. I'll give you a writing assignment and I'll work with you, outside of class time to help develop your writing. Because the one writing assignment that he had done that some other teacher had submitted to me to get my feedback on, when I gave him corrections, he basically started telling everybody I was dumb and that I didn't know what I was talking about. And so, again, for me, before Spirit kept saying to me, keep pushing through, I was just like, well, if you think I'm dumb, I can't help you. That you're not going to accept my feedback anyway. And so finally, after we got this new assignment, we got the book. I told him what I wanted him to do. He never did anything. But just like what Alicia experienced when she went back to school the next day, the problem had solved itself. This problem solved itself because I never ended up working with him one-on-one. But for the rest of that school year, what I didn't have was him trying to come into my classroom and wreak havoc behind closed doors, because it made him realize that he did need something from me and I was willing to give it. And so the decision for us not to move forward fell on him. And that resolved the situation and I was able to go on. And so I think a lot of times, like you said, not everybody is for you. Not everyone can hear things from you. There are a lot of people I can say the same things I've said to both of you at different times, but I know that they're not in the space to hear it, period, or they're not in the space to hear it from me. And that's okay. That's not a problem. And so, we wish them blessings, peace, and we just keep it moving, because the people who can hear it from you and who do need you and the people you need, to me, that's what the intuition allows us to be firm about and have a knowing about that is infallible. And so if we follow the intuition, we will know what is ours to do, who is ours to be responsible for, and who the people are who should work with us in whatever we're trying to accomplish in the world. So yeah, it's never about opening yourself so wide that every single person is, going to come within your grasp. It's about knowing who, what, when, and where, right? And that's different, but only our intuition can really guide us to that knowledge where we don't even need anybody else to say yes or validate that. We
Right.
validate it for ourselves.
Mm.
Anything else we got on this? I think
Well,
we covered a lot of stuff.
I would say, you know, when Marley mentioned before the like the wanting to feel safe, you know,
Yeah.
or like feel, I think that's how she said it.
Yeah.
Like when having these interactions with people, and then you put up these boundaries, right? And actually as a defense mechanism, because like because like even she made me think back to the situation that I was in, and I was like, that's how I was feeling in the moment. I'm like, no, you like, I felt like she was coming and she was impeding on my space, and she, you know, I had to protect myself or whatever,
Yeah.
which is our, which is like you said before, the way that I handled it was already enough to speak volumes without even having to. Now, if I wanted to have a conversation with her, I could, but you know, knowing how she is, you know, she's one of the individuals where we have to keep. She's not
Right.
gonna grasp it. It's kind of like,
Yeah.
okay, what did I do wrong? And she's gonna play the victim. So you can't always have the conversations. Like if you say have a, my whole thing is if I have a conversation, one conversation with you, and you feel like, and I feel like you're not getting it, then I would just act accordingly.
Yeah.
But even after going back and rethinking about everything, the safeness that I wanted to, the safety net that I wanted to provide for myself was only really trapped, like an entrapment, like trapping me in, because I was already safe. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was like it still went back to my perspective on how I was seeing the situation. And I felt like I still was over feeling or oversensitive in a situation. Because like, why did I need to go back afterwards after everything had happened to be like, okay, I'm leaving now? Because I sat there and I started thinking about it, and I started all these feelings was coming up, and I'm like, no, she did this to me, and she did that. You know what I mean? And I started playing the victim, which is not to take away from anybody or any situation that is a victim or like has things happen to them, but I just felt like in that moment, that's how I was feeling.
Yeah.
And because I was a victim, I needed to justify my actions instead of just saying I should have just chose another action.
Yeah.
That had nothing to really do with her. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. That makes a lot of sense. I think that, you know, when you were saying that, it started making me think. And also when you mentioned like the rejection, like mine is abandonment. Like that's my thing that I have to watch to see what it is. So basically, you know, I would leave you before you leave me was the motto. And whether you knew I left you or not, because I could still be
Wow.
there, but I would be gone. You know, all the stuff that you could have had of the morals would not be there. Now, anyone listening, I'm not saying be like me, be better than me. I'm just trying to give you, you know, the landscape. So with that said, it's like when I talk about the safety piece, it's like there's something there that I need to see. And it may not, like you mentioned this too, it may not be about the person per se,
Right.
but it's something else. And for me, like having this conversation with the both of you, it reminds me, like sometimes when I'm in a place of, yeah, I've done everything I needed to do, it's like it comes to me for trust. Do I trust myself enough to know that I've done everything, and regardless of how the other person shows up, I can handle it? And
Yeah.
like coming from a
That's big.
space or experiences where you can't trust your environment, so you're always on the ready and trying to be 2 steps ahead.
Yeah.
That can mess with your connection to your intuition and the trust that you have, that I don't need to know every single thing that's going to happen. However it shows up, I can handle it. Novel situations I've had before, but what I've experienced is when I don't tap into that and I don't trust myself, I can betray myself.
Yeah.
And it has, you know, a lot to do with myself, sometimes a little to do with the person. And the last thing I'll say is I'm like that too. Like you really know people and how they've shown up for you. And it's not like you're, you know, stereotyping them or saying this. It's just like, this is my experience of you. I've talked to you about stuff. You don't take accountability. You don't listen. You don't have all those things. Okay. I don't have any ill will, when you show up differently, or if you're open to hearing something as we're having a conversation, then I'll engage with you differently. But my energy may not be in a place to engage with you where you are.
Yeah.
And where you are is where you are.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So
I think
Mm-hmm.
I don't have anything to add. I have so many other sparks that have started to kind of come into my mind about, possible future collaborations and conversations that I think can extend this beyond. I think this is a good place to stop though, because I think you both have been dropping gems, throughout the conversation. And I definitely believe people will really resonate, with each of our experiences of this and where we are in that, in the unfoldment of that internal and intuitive knowing that allows us to have trust, to know, who we should and can help. And to be able to, I think it's so important, what you're saying, Marley, just to know that you don't have to try to control the situation. You can trust yourself to be adaptive to whatever shows up in your environment. And to me, that's really what it means to be free, right? Because you can't control the world around you. You certainly can't control other human beings. And so you can only control yourself, and learning that type of discipline. And the discipline for me really means not necessarily perfection, even though we want that in the end, but it's the discipline along the way to seek out the people who will tell you the truth in that moment, and to ask yourself questions always like, what is it about me? What do I want to change in me? Not change the people out there acting up, but always come back to ourselves. And for me, that takes a discipline to not make it about other folk and what's happening outside of us, but to say, no, like, okay, that person, yeah, they probably are in the wrong, but deep down, it's why am I bothered by that? Why can't I just let that roll off? Why am I, ready to fight them? Why am I, ready to go toe to toe with them or whatever, or to distance myself from them, in a way that's like, nah, I'm not, you ain't even human to me no more. Like all of those things that are coming up, our discipline means really centering ourselves so that we're asking ourselves, what is my work in this? How can I continue on my journey? What's my lesson in this experience that's going to help me take one step further down the pathway? So I am very thankful for this conversation. And we will continue next time. And I'm going to say namaste.